So in your notebooks, you're writing the characteristics of life, as many as you can think of. Later, we're going to create a mnemonic device, or you're going to create a mnemonic device to help you remember those. So you'll be adding on to this page. Remember, all of your pages have graphics. So if you're done with that, maybe you were one of the first people on, so you've already done your DQ, then you could go search a graphic and put it in there, or you could draw your own. So today we're going to be working with Nearpod. Here is a link to join. I put it in the chat box. I think if I give you the link, you don't need the code, but I'm going to throw the code in there. So right now you should be joining the Nearpod if you're done with your DQ. We'll go through that together. You're going to do another lab simulation during your flex time today. And then when I look at the Nearpod later, it'll show me who participated. And so when I go back to give you like participation points, that helps me, it keeps track of it for me, which is nice. Although I thought that it would tell me right off the bat who was in our group. Ah, there it is. Okay, that looks like a good amount. So we'll get going on this. So today we're reviewing, yesterday you read about the characteristics of living things. So of this list, circle the items which are living. So on my end, I see your progress. So it shows me 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 of us have submitted. There's a handful of us still working. So when you submit, we'll be ready to move on. This is kind of an easy slide.
Mine's still not working.
Okay, so from that list, hopefully you identified cats, cells, leaves on trees. Those were easy ones to say we're living. Sand, soil, water, we're not living. Hey, I had deleted Peppy from this list. Oh yeah, he wasn't on your list. Peppy and Poppy, they're my geckos. We usually have them in class, so you normally would have been familiar with them. A horse, of course, is living. Horse, of course. Bacteria is living. Soil can be tricky because it itself is not living, though there's many, many, many living organisms within it. Dried leaves are not currently living, but they're part of something that has once lived. So they're going to have many of the same characteristics of living things. Air, of course, is not living, and Peppy wasn't on your slide set. So what are the characteristics that these things all have in common? So throw down some of those characteristics that show that living things are alive. So they got to have cells. Excellent. What else do we need, gang? I didn't mean. So we got cells. Are they breathing? They breathe. Has to be able to reproduce. Cells can reproduce. Genes, breathing, water. They all react to the environment. Growth and development. Cells. Cells is a pretty common, popular one. Form of energy, food and such. Reproduction. Okay, so any of these do you think, let me get the ding dong doorbell here. Are there any in that list that you think maybe are not needed for all living things? Does anybody disagree with any of those? Throw it in the chat box. Are there any that you think are not needed to be qualified for life? Looking for it in the chat. There's probably 2 in there, maybe 1, maybe 2 that don't belong. Not all living things. Couple things there. A couple people are jumping in. Identifying water. Not all living things require water. It's easy for us to think of water as a needed thing because we need it, but like a bacterium doesn't need it. Genes seems like something that all living things have. A virus, however, is not living, and it has genes. But we do have genetics and heredity and inheritance, and that is a characteristic of all living things. So genes, that's a tricky one. Might be, it's how you interpret it. Breathing is one that not all living things need to do. So when we say breathing, we're saying take in oxygen and breathe out CO2. Plants, though they have an exchange of gases, they're not taking in oxygen and getting rid of CO2. And like bacteria, there's many bacteria that are anaerobes, so they actually would die in the presence of oxygen, or there's some that just don't need oxygen at all to live. So those are a couple that were, you know, on the fence. Oh, you guys, that's right. I changed a couple of your words. You had sponge. So somebody asked if I meant like a kitchen sponge. So it depends on if it was a synthetic sponge or a live sponge. Sponges are actually animals. And if you get a live sponge or an organic sponge, you'll notice quite a bit of a difference from that and the synthetic or man-made sponge. I'd have to look at the list and see. I forgot I changed a couple of them on there for you. So we want to say that living things must meet these 8 characteristics. They must be made of cells. They use energy, and that's where some of you wrote down nutrition or food. We take in nutrients and we use that to create energy. Or plants take in sunlight and create energy and food from that. We display organization, and you're going to go a little deeper into that one today. Adaptations over time. Maintain homeostasis, that's this afternoon's activity. Growth and sensitivity, or you might say irritability, or you might say respond to stimuli, and then we reproduce. So I'm going to answer a couple questions here. If you can't follow along in the Nearpod, the PowerPoint is linked without the Nearpod in our Google Classroom. So you can just open up that. There's needing the link here. Let me send the link out again. Oh, that's the code. Sorry. Link. And then there's a question about breathing. In the sense of breathing is taking in oxygen and getting rid of CO2. Not all living things do that. Like I said, some bacteria don't utilize oxygen at all. So if something does not meet the 8 characteristics, it's not considered living. A virus, for example, a virus does some of these things, but not all of these things. It does not reproduce on its own. Your cells make more of it. It doesn't grow. It doesn't get bigger. It does adapt. It does not utilize energy, and it's not actually made of cells. It doesn't have any organelles. It just has a protein coat and a genetic core, and that's all it is. So a virus is not considered living because it doesn't meet those 8 characteristics. So when we talk about utilizing energy, living things need to take in substances from their environment to obtain energy. We take it in through food, right? This allows us to grow and stay healthy because we use those nutrients from our food to build up proteins, carbohydrates, lipids, nucleic acids that make us up. They're made up of more than one cell. This is a paramecium. A paramecium is a unicellular organism. Many of the organisms in the domains, bacteria, eubacteria and archaebacteria, many of the organisms in the kingdom Protista are single-celled organisms. So they might only be made of one. They might be made of many. So here, these are nerve cells, epithelial cells from your cheek, and a white blood cell. So we are made up of many different types of cells, and next week you're going to get into that level of organization. So the levels of organization begin with atoms and molecules, and they increase in complexity. So if I put atoms together, I make molecules. If I put molecules together, I make organelles. If I put organelles together, I can make cells. I put cells together to make tissues. Tissues go into organs, and organs go into organ systems and organisms and an ecosystem and a biome and a biosphere, and it just keeps getting more and more complex. So each part of the cell has a job, and each cell has a job, so that allows cells to carry out their life functions. So here's an open-ended. You type your answers. What is the smallest level of organization in the study of life? What do you think is the largest or most complex level of organization? You can type in your answer. If you're not on the Nearpod because you were having trouble logging on, you could just venture a guess. It's showing me when you have answers. So right now I have a page full of no answers. So you want to get onto the keyboard and start typing. So each of the different resources you use, I feel, give us different levels. Some are very broad in their thinking and some are very narrow in your thinking. So depending on your background, depending on the knowledge you're coming into this class with, depending on what you've read outside of this class, we'll find we probably are going to have different levels of organization. How small we get, how big we get. We're at 68%. Couple of us looking for us to start typing. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, no typing. 6, 7. This is your participation for the day. Are you participating? We're stalled out. If you're not typing, it makes me think that you might have just walked away from the computer. Some of you guys go faceless. And when you do that, I understand you could sneak away. And this is making me think that you snuck away because I'm talking and talking and talking about you and you're not writing anything. Even if you have no idea, you know, what's the smallest thing you can think of? What's the biggest thing you can think of? So this is what I was saying. Depending on the resource you use, they get smaller, they get, like, it depends on how complex they are. So you might have started with cells and you put them together to make tissues and organs and organ systems and organisms. So that's fine. We can get smaller and we can get more complex. So subatomic particles like protons, neutrons, and electrons. So again, this is where, like, depending on your background knowledge, you're going to come into this class with different levels of understanding. So those go together to make atoms. Atoms go together to make molecules, like a carbon goes in to make carbohydrates, which go, that is a macromolecule. Maybe a monosaccharide, which makes a polysaccharide, like starch, and that can go into a cell, which we find in our cell wall, cellulose, tissues, organs, organ systems, organisms. See, that was common there. Then we get into ecology, and if you put a whole bunch of groups or individuals together in an area, they make up a population. And then if I count all the different types of organisms in that area, I'm looking at a community. And then if I take in the organisms that live in that area plus the non-living things, I'm looking at their ecosystem. And I get bigger than that into a geographical area that has the same basic weather pattern, and I have a biome. And then the whole globe, the layer of the earth that supports life, all the way up into the air that supports birds, that would be the biosphere. Below that and above that, not the biosphere. Okay, so it depended on how much information you were coming in with and how narrow or broad your thinking is. You could very well have different answers. This is a page we're going to add to our notebook later. So we're going to have our levels of organization. We're going to put 2 examples. So if you want to put words or graphics, that's fine. And then a short description. So that is, we're going to start using that interactive notebook a little bit more. This would be a note page rather than a DQ. So we'll come back to that later. So adaptations are like advantages that organisms have, traits that we have that we didn't used to have. So if you look at your wrist, for example, what wrist can I use as an example? Do you see, can you see the little cords in here? So look at your wrist. Do you have 2 or do you have 3 or do you have 1 of those? So this center one, this is the palmara longus. And it, you know, we come from the tree grasping apes, and that's no longer a trait we need. So over time, that's beginning to evolve out of the human population. So you may or may not have that. I heard from my chiropractor, I have to research this, that only 30% of the humans now have the palmar longus tendon because we no longer need that trait. And I have it, which makes me really excited because it means I'm closely related to the monkeys, which are my favorites. Growth, we get bigger, both our cells and as total organisms. Growth and development are two different things, right? Growth is just size, and development has to do with changing abilities. Okay, we respond to stimuli. You might see this called irritability or sensitivity, and it's just responding to stimuli outside of our body as well as inside of our body. So you might not think about like we have to adjust our glucose levels throughout the day. Reproduction of cells and of the human species or any species. So all living things can reproduce. Bacteria, algae, us, viruses cannot, and so they are not living things. We maintain homeostasis, and this is the one that we're going to spend more time with today. Next week, we're going to spend more time with levels of organization. So homeostasis is keeping things stable while changing. So we can maintain a stable temperature in our bodies, blood fluid composition, like our blood, blood sugar, gas concentrations, and blood pressure. I left my phone upstairs and I hear my dinger going off, which says, speed up, Miss Snook. So real quick, an example of homeostasis in humans is sweating. How is this an example? How is sweating an example of homeostasis? And I'm gonna real quick go grab my phone and turn my alarm off. One moment. You type, I'll do this. Oh, I have no answers. What is this? Okay, a couple of. When you sweat, your body is getting hot. I'm not sure what Hisu is. Your body sweats to cool it off and maintain around the same body temperature. That is an excellent answer. We are reacting to being hot. It's a body's way of naturally cooling off. Yeah, so we want to keep our temperature in a steady range. So by sweating, we're able to release some of our extra heat. Good job. Okay. So recap, this is the 8 that you're going to want, and the PowerPoint is in the Google Classroom. So if you need to open it up later, you can do that. We're made of cells. We utilize energy. Display organization, adapt over time. These are all questions I could ask you on a test or quiz, which is going to come up after next week. You want to be able to give examples, recognize examples, and talk about each of these individual things. Okay. In your notebook, so earlier you wrote down the characteristics of life, and in case you didn't know what I meant when I said an acronym or a mnemonic, so these are, I picked a different one, but these are the taxonomy levels of organization. And so like if I wanted to remember this, I could either come up with a word that had the first letter maybe of all of those, or I could come up with a sentence. So did King Phil come over for good soup? And that would help me remember. D is for domain, K is for kingdom, P is for phylum. But you would do that for the 8 characteristics of life, okay? So that one in your notebook today for your warm-up. You might come back to that and do the mnemonic. We're gonna add this one next week. So if you don't get started on that today, that's fine. The rest of the hour, you're going to be working on your homeostasis activity. This is in Gizmo, and so you're going to need this code. So write that code down, although I did put it, you have a whole page with that on it in the Google Classroom. You'll go to explorelearning.com. This PowerPoint is interactive. That link should be in Google Classroom. Okay, and you're going to open up the homeostasis activity. So this is going to be a simulation. You'll go through this. You watch a little video to begin with. I did link that in Google Classroom as well, so just click one right after the other. Something that you're going to struggle with maybe is how to put the graph. So I made a little video and I'll put that in Google Classroom.
Okay, I'm in the Google Classroom and I've opened up your Flex
Stop.
Day.
Because
and I see the
because I've run out of time, I don't want to keep you, but that's in Google Classroom. So when you're doing the worksheet, you're like, how can I add a graph? If you don't know, I'll just tell you, like, you're going to basically turn the graph into a picture and then you can edit it. But if you don't know what I'm talking about when I say that, watch the video, okay? So I'm kind of wrapping up really quick because our dinger went off.